Red and blue filled my living room like a busted fireworks show. Groceries still in my hand. Rain dripping off my hat, and outside the window, Lydia Crane, our brand new HOA president, was pointing at me like a traffic cop who'd lost the plot. "Officer, that's him. He's trespassing in his own house. Trespassing in my own house. Try to make that make sense." The taller cop looked gentle but wary. The shorter one checked my ID, and Lydia waved a folder like it was a badge of honor. He left for the weekend. He didn't file the return notice. His boat's in the wrong slip section, this and that. Criminal trespass. She rattled off, and yeah, that happened. And I just stood there, trying to keep my voice steady while my heart kicked like a boot. I told them my name is Cole Harper. The deed is in the file cabinet, and the place is mine. Simple as that. But simple doesn't count for much when the loudest person is the most certain. You know what I mean? Before this night, I thought Cedar Ridge Shores was the kind of neighborhood where people wave and mean it. I bought here because the lake talks soft in the morning, and because a retired nurse named Ruth once welcomed me with banana bread and said rules are for peace, not power. Then Ruth moved to Arizona. The board elected Lydia, and suddenly we had 6-page emails with 12 headers and 50-something bullet points, including a new return notice rule if you were gone more than a day. I'm not a fighter by nature. I'm a fix-it-in-the-morning person. So when I drove up to my small cabin at Granite Run to fix a busted step and a storm rolled in fast, I packed up early. Left a voicemail for the HOA and an email too, returning due to weather to check on my neighbor Ms. Langley, who uses a medical device. I'll file whatever form tomorrow. Thank you. I got back to Cedar Ridge in a cold drizzle. Checked on Ms. Langley, made her tea taped a loose cord so she wouldn't trip, and as I crossed my yard, Lydia rolled by, slow eyes on my truck outset. Like a ruler. 10 minutes later, the sirens came, the knock came, and a tow truck rumbled up like a punchline you never asked for. And that's when my stomach turned, because my boat, the one I named Grace in my mother's handwriting, groaned under the hook, and I heard Mom in my head saying name something Grace, and try to live like you named it. The HOA's lawyer arrived in a gray suit with a gray briefcase and a gray mood, asked to see my deed, and I laid it out on the kitchen island. Parcel number signatures and a developer addendum from 15 years ago that most folks forget exists. A builder named Stanford Bell wrote it plain. Certain parcels mine included hold permanent dock access and emergency ingress that cannot be suspended by later HOA policy, especially during severe weather or medical need, and those rights run with the land. The lawyer read it once then, twice, then slid his glasses up and read it again. Stepped back like the page was hot, whispered no, and snapped his briefcase closed. "I'm resigning from counsel to the association effective now," he said. And Lydia's jaw fell open, and the taller cop hid a smile in his sleeve. And me, I should have felt vindicated. But the tow driver hadn't gotten the memo, and the hook scraped again, and Grace winced. "Give us 1 minute," the taller cop told the driver, and Lydia snapped that the dock schedule was law, and he forfeited access and moved the boat, and I looked at her, really looked, at the tired smudges under her eyes, and the twitch in her hand, fear wearing a mask, and I just asked softly if she was okay, which didn't land. How I hoped. Then Brett Nolan, the vice president, in a polo 2 sizes too ambitious, jogged up with a red folder and declared an emergency vote, lean tonight, toe now, end of story, and jammed a red sign into my lawn, that said property in violation, subject to eviction, and porches up and down the street opened like eyes. At the same time, while rain ran off the eaves and kids peered around legs, and Mrs. Diaz hugged her sweater, and Mr. Patel stepped a little closer like a quiet anchor. Headlights washed the mailboxes, and a county SUV rolled in, followed by a sedan and a news van, with a camera already rising, and Deputy Marshal Collins asked to see the deed, and I laid it out again, and he read with the patience of a man who hates being rushed by bad decisions. Before he spoke, the tow hook slipped, swung like a pendulum, smashed my mailbox, and letters fluttered through the wet air, and the street inhaled as one. Then another SUV slid to the curb. A man in a navy suit stepped out with a sealed order that gleamed under the porch light, and he said, "Everyone, step back, by order of the court." Temporary restrainings order, effective immediately. The HOA is barred from enforcing any rule that restricts emergency return or dock access for parcels with developer rights. Pending a full hearing, the taller officer read, and Brett laughed that thin laugh people do when they step where a curb should be and find a ditch. And the man in the suit shook his head. Days, not months. The judge read your 5:11 p.m. emails. You attached your own minutes helpful, and introduced himself as Avery Shaw from 2 streets over, who filed when Ms. Langley's granddaughter called about the power and the tow. And I felt my throat go tight because sometimes kindness leaves your hands and finds its way back to you. The driver unhooked fast. The cameraman angled the shot so my address wouldn't show. Small mercy. And quiet began to drift back down the street. But quiet didn't last because Brett stepped out of the shadows with a security volunteer who looked like he'd rather be home and tried a new angle. Interior inspection camera footage, daily fines. And I told him, "You're not the city. You're not law enforcement. You're my neighbor. You can measure my fence from the sidewalk, that's it." The volunteer mumbled, "Maybe we should—" Brett cut him off, and Mr. Patel stepped between Brett and my porch with a voice like velvet wrapped around steel. "Stop. You're not the law. Act like a neighbor or resign." And Mrs. Diaz crossed the street and said this place was fine until you picked up a hammer and called it a crown. And Brett hissed that soft breaks, and I told him soft bends. It doesn't break. And then the lake wrote itself into the story because a siren wailed from the far dock. Red strobes cut the night, and somebody shouted, "Man overboard, we need help." And everything we were arguing about shrank to the size of a raindrop. The taller cop and I moved at the same time Mr. Patel. Right behind us, the volunteer shaking off his hesitation like a coat that never fit, and I backed the trailer slid. Grace into the black silver water-tossed life vests, gunned the throttle, lined up with the flashing light, while wind clawed at my ears and the skiff banged against a piling, and a girl sobbed a name I couldn't catch. We hauled one man in, then the girl coughing water and fear together, and she gripped my sleeve and croaked that her brother had tried to swim for the dock, and he was still out there, and my stomach fell. And we swept the dark until Mr. Patel pointed at a ripple too far from everything, and I cut the engine and dove. Cold hit like a fist. The world went green-black, then a sleeve, a hand letting go, and I wrapped him and kicked like my lungs were promises. Broke the surface into rain, and shouting got him on deck, and the officer started compressions counting steady, and Mr. Patel breathed for the kid between sets, while I held his hand and talked to him like he could hear me. Maybe prayer, maybe foolishness, until the boy coughed and water spilled, and his chest rose ragged and real. On the dock, the medics took over. The girl clung to her brother's fingers, like love could stitch him to the world. And the neighborhood changed in the kind of silence that doesn't need speeches. Lydia stood there with no clipboard and a poncho heavy with rain and said I was wrong. She said she thought if she controlled enough, nothing bad would happen. But tonight reminded her people matter more than paper. Then she pulled the HOA president lanyard from her neck and let it fall into the water where it floated once and sank, and Brett tried to bluster that she couldn't quit, and everyone quietly turned their backs. And that was that. Morning came warm and bright. We made pancakes on the common lawn. Someone burned the first batch, and it still tasted like victory. Ms. Langley brought mismatched mugs with little flowers. I fixed my mailbox, and then hers, because that's the order she'd want, and Avery dropped off extra copies of the court order for the truck and the house and the folder by the door. Overprepared is sometimes what kindness looks like on paper. Lydia came by with coffee and said your boat saved lives, and I told her people saved lives. Grace is just fiberglass with a name that keeps me honest. And she told me about a break-in years back and how rules made her feel like she could lock the world again. And I told her I'm sorry, and that rules that help us feel safe shouldn't make other people unsafe. A week later, we held a special election. Folks wore their good hats. Lydia didn't run. Brett did too. He talked about brand value and standards and property lines. People listened because we're polite. Then they voted him out so quietly. You could hear the pen click, and a hardware store owner opened the meeting with Ruth's old line. Rules are for peace, not power. And the lake talked soft again. If you were on that porch with me, whose side would you be on? And why? Lydia's fear of chaos, or a neighbor's right to come home early to help someone. Do HOAs keep order or hide control behind paperwork? Where's the line between safety and overreach? Drop your take in the comments. Tell me what you've seen, what you've lived, who got it right, and where mercy belongs in the rules.